Welcome back to the Faith and Focus podcast. I'm Laura, and in episode 2 of our OCR A-Level Religious Studies revision series, we're diving into the first major area, philosophy of religion. In this episode, we'll explore ancient philosophical influences, arguments for the existence of God, and a full scholar and quote bank to support your revision. So let's get started. Segment 1, we're going to look at ancient philosophical influences. So why do you need to know this? So understanding Plato and Aristotle is essential for grasping the philosophical foundations of arguments about God, the soul, and the nature of reality. Their ideas form the backbone of metaphysical and theological thinking that influences many later scholars and religious doctrines. Questions about ancient influences often come up in the 40-mark AO1 or AO2 sections of the philosophy paper. So let's look at Plato to start with then. So Plato and his theory of forms. So obviously you will have gone over these things in a lot more detail. This is merely an overview to give you something for last minute revision. So Plato argued that true reality lies in an unchanging perfect realm of forms. The world we live in is just a shadow or a copy of that reality. Plato is a dualist and a rationalist, so he thinks that the soul is eternal and the body distracts from knowledge. His allegory of the cave illustrates how most people mistake sensory experience for truth, while philosophers seek real knowledge of the forms. And a key quote from Plato there is, "The soul is imprisoned in the body." So Aristotle, the four causes and the prime mover. Aristotle rejected Plato's world of forms and instead used observation to understand the world. He argued everything has four causes: material, formal, efficient, and final. The final cause, or telos, gives an object its purpose. So remember that idea of telos and the final cause, because that will come up later. He concluded that there must be a prime mover, an uncaused causer that initiates motion and is pure actuality. Key quote, "There must be a cause of all things which itself is not caused." Exam tip: when you get an essay question on Plato and Aristotle, you need to look at their approaches and compare them. So you want rationalism versus empiricism, you want form versus telos, and then how each of those relates to belief in God. So segment 2 then, arguments for the existence of God. So you need to know this because classical arguments are core content of the philosophy of religion paper. There are a lot of questions come up on this, frequently the subject of AO2 evaluative questions. Being able to explain and critically assess the cosmological, teleological and ontological arguments means that you can answer the 40-mark questions with confidence. So these arguments directly link to debates about faith and reason and evidence that will come up later on. So 3 classical arguments that you need to know: cosmological, teleological and ontological. Alright, so the cosmological argument is Aquinas. It's based on motion, cause and contingency. The universe needs a cause, it cannot have come from nothing, you cannot have infinite regress, something's got to have started it, and Aquinas says that God is the uncaused causer, the unmoved mover and the necessary being. Strengths of that argument: it appeals to observation and logic. Aquinas is looking at the world and looking at things within it that can tell us about God. It's compatible with the Big Bang Theory, and it avoids this idea of infinite regress, so you can't keep going back and back and back and back and back. Something has to start it physically, according to Aquinas. Weaknesses: it doesn't prove which God. So arguments obviously around, is that Judeo-Christian God? Is that Allah? Is that Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, whatever? So it doesn't actually show which God it is. There is an idea about why the universe can't be eternal. So why can't it just exist and be there the same way that people would assume that God just exists? And then Bertrand Russell says this idea about the universe being a brute fact. So he says the universe is just there and that's all, which is a good quote that you can use. Okay, teleological argument. So we're looking at Paley. So this is another argument that's based on design and purpose seen in nature. And it uses the analogy of a watch needing a watchmaker. So you will have gone through that analogy of, if you saw a rock on the beach, you would assume it's natural and it's meant to be there. But if you came across a watch, you would assume it's got a designer because it's something that's intricate and complicated. So strengths of that argument, it is intuitive. I think most people would argue that you can tell the difference between something that is natural and something that is designed. It's supported by the fine-tuning of the universe. So over time, the universe has tweaked itself and modified itself, which one could argue is God's intervention. And Richard Swinburne says that design is the simplest explanation. All the rest of it is far too complicated. Weaknesses. David Hume says analogies are weak and the world is flawed, so we can't assume that the analogy is the explanation. Darwin says natural selection explains apparent design. So it's not designed, it's selected, which is different. We get the ontological argument, which is Anselm. So this is of the three, this is the a priori argument. The other two are a posteriori, so after experience. The ontological argument is the only one that's before experience. And it's a deductive argument, so you need to know the difference between inductive and deductive. Defines God as the greatest conceivable being, so that than which no greater can be conceived. And if God only exists in the mind, a greater being can be imagined, because your version of God might be different to mine. So the greatest version of God has got to be a physically real God, which is better than one that you can imagine, so therefore he must exist. Strengths of that argument, it doesn't rely on empirical evidence. It is something that we can just use our own minds to deduce, and it is a logical and concise argument. However, weaknesses, Gornio comes up with his perfect island rebuttal of this argument and says that you can define anything into existence. And Immanuel Kant says existence is not a predicate. So a predicate of God is not that he exists. Again, that's a very quick overview. These are designed for short, sharp bursts of revision. You will need to go over these in more detail. Segment 3, we're looking at a scholar and quote bank. So a quote bank is a really good idea. Most people, I'm assuming, will have one by now. If you don't, it could be something that can really help you to organise your revision. So you can demonstrate detailed knowledge and critical engagement in your essays if you use scholars. And quoting named scholars strengthens your argument, and it shows the examiners that you know where those ideas come from. Otherwise, it looks like you're coming up with those ideas, which obviously you aren't. So make sure that you can explain each one and apply each one in context. So I'm going to go through a list of different scholars and some quotes that you can use to support your arguments. And then we'll look at what you can do with that information at the end. So Plato says the soul is imprisoned in the body. Aristotle, there must be a cause of all things, which itself is not caused. Aquinas, there must be a first cause, itself uncaused. William Paley, every manifestation of design exists in the work of nature. Anselm, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. If you want critics and empiricists, we've got David Hume. I've got a list of his quotes here. So David Hume says, a wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. The world, for aught he knows, is very faulty and imperfect compared to a superior standard. Why may not the material universe be the necessary existent being? The effects do not resemble the cause. This world, for all he knows, is the first rude essay of some infant deity. Then we've got Charles Darwin, natural selection, so you can talk about anything from natural selection. Gornio, you can use his perfect island objection. Immanuel Kant says existence is not a predicate. Bertrand Russell, the universe is just there and that's all. And Richard Swinburne, the hypothesis of God makes sense of the order of the universe. Okay, so next thing we're going to look at is a revision strategy. So this is flashcards. So flashcards are really good for when you've got to remember lots of scholars and ideas, I find. So when used with space retrieval, they help you engage in active recall, which is one of the most efficient ways to prepare for your RE exam. So, how do you create a flashcard deck? So first of all, you need to create 3 types of flashcards. You need the scholar and the quote. You need one with argument name and an explanation. And then one with strengths or weaknesses and the matching counterpoint. So if you're doing strengths, the matching weakness. Okay, so you could do front, what is Aquinas, third way. Back, you could put the argument from contingency, all things are contingent, so there must be one necessary being, which is God. On a front, you could put a quote from Anselm's ontological argument. On the back, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. On a different one, you could put front, weaknesses of the teleological argument. Back, Hume, flawed design implies flawed designer. Okay, so to use these, you can use the 2-3-5-7 rule of space retrieval. You can shuffle them and test in both directions, so you can get the question and the answer and the question. And you can also use them as like a matching pairs thing. I would use them that way maybe. You could also sort your cards into got it, almost, and needs work. And your focus every day of revision should be on the needs work pile until you get that into almost or the got it pile. So your challenge is to create a flashcard for each key scholar, quote, and argument from today's episode. Aim for 10 high quality cards by tonight. And that wraps up episode 2 of the Faith and Focus podcast. We've explored the foundations of Western philosophy with Plato and Aristotle, broken down 3 of the most significant arguments for God's existence, and built a bank of powerful quotes and scholars to support your revision and essay writing. Don't forget your challenge for today is to create those flashcards and keep testing yourself regularly. And in the next episode, we'll continue with philosophy of religion by tackling 3 of the most thought-provoking topics: problem of evil and suffering, religious experience, and challenges to religious belief. We'll also give you some more revision strategies and some more quotes. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and keep learning. Bye!